Welcome to Customer Service Academy Radio with author and customer experience expert Tony Johnson. Tony will share his vision for successful customer service, leadership, and business excellence, and speak to some of the most impactful leaders in business today. And now, here's Tony Johnson.
Hello, everybody. Customer Service Academy is on the air. I'm Tony Johnson, your customer experience speaker, consultant, and trainer. Today's episode coming to you courtesy of Ignite Your Service Training and Consulting and 4XI Global Consulting and Solutions. Truly better together. Folks, as I've been saying, I have the best courses out there right now. The year is still young. Head on over to thetonyjohnson.teachable.com to check out my 6 canons of customer service. And don't forget to go to igniteyourservice.com/summits to learn more about the upcoming summits this year that are going to happen all over the country, where you can come and learn about leadership, customer experience, and employee experience. Today, we are welcoming Alex Grande onto the show. Alex is an entrepreneur and workplace innovation expert who combines gamification with HR technology to help organizations build stronger, more connected cultures. As the founder of Recognize, a social employee engagement platform, he helps companies improve communication, recognition, and retention. Those are the big dogs, folks. With a degree in psychology and published research in unconscious bias and social cognition, Alex brings an evidence-based, human-centered approach to creating recognition programs that drive lasting cultural change. And that is an amazing big deal. Alex, so great to have you here and welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Tony.
So I'm really excited. Now, I'm actually, folks, don't freak out there in the universe. I'm going to spin our first question. We usually lead off with, what does great customer experience mean to you? But we are going to spin that because this is a really great opportunity to get a great perspective from an expert here. What does it mean to provide a great employee experience from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the employee experience is a sum of everything that happens in the workplace, right? From the tools, the processes to, a hot topic right now is psychological safety. So all that combines into that employee experience. As someone who has a background in psychology, but also web development, it's like the UX. The interface is the company, and the employees are the users, and how easily can they flow through that experience. From talking to a lot of HR professionals and managers, something that I've seen recently that's really interesting to help create really great employee experience, it's something that people aren't really doing, which is standardizing and teaching how to do one-on-ones, how to do recognition, how to do feedback. If you ask a manager or an HR professional, they'll, how are you doing feedback? Oh, no idea. We don't know if our managers are doing feedback, or, what about one-on-ones? Oh, they can just do one-on-ones however they want. There's a huge opportunity here to standardize those things, put data around them, and help people set up for success. Like with feedback, if you're not asking for feedback, then you're settling with complacency, right? If you're over giving feedback, you're micromanaging. So there's a balance there that I'd love to talk more about in this conversation.
So you mentioned something early on. Was it intellectual safety? Was that the phrase that you used? Can you help our listeners understand a little bit about what that is? That might not be a phrase we've used on the show before.
Yeah. Psychological safety. So basically, it's that idea that you feel comfortable in your work environment. You feel comfortable talking to your manager, right? A great relationship with a manager isn't one that you need to use these kinds of tricks like feedback sandwich, right? If you are giving recognition, if you're celebrating successes, and you're having a real relationship with people, you don't need to use tricks like that. You can actually listen to people and also provide feedback. The listening is so important. One thing I like to do in my personal life is every once in a while ask my closest friends and family, hey, what's the worst thing about me, right? Get some, and then I'll preface it with, hey, I'm a big boy, I can take it. Tell me the truth, right? And you want to have that same relationship with your employees where they feel safe telling you, hey, I'm having this issue. And that's psychological safety.
That's fantastic. Thanks for fleshing that out a little bit. So in your experience, what are the must-haves for a successful, sustainable recognition program? You mentioned great recognition. So what does that mean? What does a great program mean? Because we have a lot of leaders on here who lead teams, particularly in hospitality, leisure, food service, sports and entertainment, financial services. We got a pretty wide swath. but the one cornerstone of our listenership is really
Mhm.
we have people who lead people here. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. The most common recognition program, 75% of companies have a anniversary program, right? Celebrating years of service. So simply, if you've been here for a year, you could be, you could be have silent quit a long time ago, and we're still going to celebrate you. Whereas 50% of companies have a peer-to-peer recognition program. And back in 2016, it was 40%. So it is increasing, but because only half of companies have a peer-to-peer, right? That's where an employee can recognize another employee, right? These moments of success are invisible to most leaders. So it can be a strategic asset, a strategic advantage for a company to have a peer-to-peer recognition program. And it's not about just being like, hey, pat on the back, I want people to feel good. It's actually celebrating those successes, recording those successes, creating that culture of achievement. Winners want to work with winners. And so if you're celebrating that and recording that, you'll just create this snowball effect of success.
And I
Um,
love that you brought up peer-to-peer recognition. I'm a huge fan. I think it's the purest form of recognition there is. There's no ask out of it. It's usually very pure and very honest. So that anything really peer-to-peer, whether it's peer-to-peer hiring and selection and interviewing, peer-to-peer engagement, peer-to-peer mentoring, peer-to-peer recognition. I love that you brought that up because it's such a great topic.
Yeah, yeah. And there's things that need to go along with that. It's not just letting people just say whatever they want. It's not just saying, not only recognizing, success, let's say in a, sales situation, a great job on getting a sale. Okay, great, right? But instead, how about the behavior or the identity that you want to be incentivizing? Like, great work on active listening in that sales call, right? The things that lead to the actual success. That's what you want to be recognizing. And another thing that you want to do in that is teaching your employees to, when you write the message, to have context. Like if you were to look back at that message a year later, which is actually really fun to do, like we just had a 5-year anniversary with one of our employees. We look back at the recognitions for the last 5 years. And when you actually can remember what that meant, because there's context in that recognition message, not just, hey, great work, right? But being more specific, so you can actually know what that meant, right? So there's some subtleties that are important there.
No doubt. So, what are some effective ways to use gamification to reinforce those key behaviors and drive performance? I mean, we talk a lot about that, especially with some of our younger generational cohorts, and some of the older ones too. But some of the newer generational cohorts love the idea of gamification, love the idea of having that something a little extra in it. When you think about that, what are effective ways to make sure that it's used properly and it's sort of in the mix? And from your perspective as an expert on this.
Yeah, so that's a great question. Gamification, can be tricky for people who are new to it, but it really comes down to looking at and working with the leaders of the organization to what are the skills or KPIs. Less than 10% of companies have skill-based pay and raise compensation, but you can use gamification, right, that may be tied to a compensation of some kind of bonus around those skills or KPIs. So, for instance, in manufacturing safety or healthcare safety is another one that you can gamify, right? One of the big things I love to do is group gamification, right? So you're kind of, back to that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? You pit people against each other, but it creates kind of an unhealthy relationship when it's one person versus another person. But when it's maybe a group versus another group, then it can really drive motivation and building that intrinsic motivation. And so again, back to my previous point, it's not about getting the sale; it's about how you got to the sale, right? So it's the same thing. You want to be incentivizing how you got to the win, gamifying the activities like documentation, right? And so, the way we use that with our program is we have leaderboards, we have badges, right? It's social, there's comments, there's points. The points lead to concert tickets, things like that. So you can use off-the-shelf solutions like Recognize to do that, or you can set up yourself using some custom solutions.
Are any of those pieces more effective than others, or do they all have a place in sort of the lexicon of this kind of social recognition. Does one pack more of a punch than others?
Well, I think we all know, like when you get like, I do like a review of a restaurant on Google and I get points. What do those do? It's meaningless. It's almost like it's so contrived. It's actually backfires, right? But when the points actually lead to something, right? When they lead to a bonus, they lead to some kind of incentive change. In gamification, there's an acronym I think is really important. It's SAPS. It stands for status, access, power, and stuff. So those are the four levers you can utilize to motivate people. The biggest one is status, right? Being noticed, or being put in that newsletter by the executive for being a leader, or getting a new job title, getting that senior added to your job title, right? Or access to a conference, right? Power to make a decision because you've shown to be a leader in a certain topic. And then yes, also adding in the compensation component as well. Those four things, status, access, power, and stuff, are an incredible way to motivate your employees intrinsically and extrinsically.
And that's so interesting because that idea of status, if you're a member of any reward systems out there, folks listening, I'm a Hilton guy. You've heard me say that 1,000 times. Over the years, being a diamond member has meant less and less, but the status still remains. And I'm still very proud when they say, "Welcome, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for being a diamond member." That sort of makes it worth it. Although, don't get me wrong, I love the 1.5 bounce. I love the upgrades. I love the extra beverage at check-in. I love the food and beverage. All that stuff's great. But a lot of it is about that maintaining that status, and it is one of the reasons why I mean, I love Hilton, but it's also a reason why I've been so
Mm-hmm.
loyal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's all about the kind of going along with that. It's all about the the details. Like, what's the difference between a mediocre restaurant and a Michelin restaurant? As I mentioned before we started recording, I'm in Madrid, and I went to a Michelin restaurant this week, and they were waiting for me at the door. And I walk in, and they're like, "Can we take your jacket?" Right? That sense of status. It's an incredible feeling that we all crave.
So we keep hearing about, folks, this whole idea of, will teams stay remote? Will teams go back to work? What's hybrid look like? And, remote work in one way or another is definitely here to stay. But there are so many leaders out there I hear that still struggle with that. How can companies and leaders strengthen cultures across these fully remote and distributed teams? That, the fact that folks can work anywhere in a lot of different things and can be anywhere. And you and I are having a conversation. You're halfway around the world from where I am in Lakeland, Florida, and it still is new in the lifeline and timeline of work as we know it. It's still a fairly new thing. What do folks need to know as they're continuing to try to build this culture in this remote and distributed type of team environment?
So there's so many things you can do. When we talk to managers, what's the worst thing about remote work? Oftentimes it feels like it's velocity. It's the time between decisions, right? So going back to the first question on employee experience, when you can break down and remove those barriers to approval, right? One of the biggest slowdowns in velocity in remote teams is waiting for someone to get back to you. So if you don't have to get back to them, they can make the decision on their own. You can greatly increase that velocity. Also those water cooler moments. So, in our Microsoft Teams, we have a water cooler channel, right? And so people can say whatever they want there, and it's really fun. And I contribute to that as well to show that it's okay to share. It's fun to share. And I also try and incorporate that into meetings, right? If we start the meeting and we're chatting, or maybe in the middle of the meeting, it kind of segues to just chatting. We don't get that in a remote environment. You're not passing someone in the hall. You don't overhear someone say something and you turn and, oh, what was that? So just allowing these organic conversations. Sometimes the people leading the meetings will be like, okay, we have a lot to cover. Let's get on topic. And I try to say, hey, let's just talk a little bit more. Just because it creates that connection. I mean, people are lonely when they're at home alone, and people have less friends now than ever. And today, around 60% of companies allow people to work from home sometime of the week. So creating that. Also, another thing I believe strongly is just back to the employee experience, reducing the number of meetings. A lot of companies will have stand-ups, every day, right? These hour-long stand-ups where you're just listening to other people talk about what they're doing, and you're not involved at all. And I think that's a huge time suck. And so we actually use a tool called Geekbot, and it integrates into Teams, to Slack. And on Monday we ask what your goals are, right? And Wednesday we ask how's it going? Do you need any help? And then on Friday, hey, what goals did you accomplish? And that's it. And then I can read through my whole team's what they're doing. I just feel like a lot of times those stand-ups are basically just for the manager to know what's going on. Everyone else is rolling their eyes. So streamlining those process, asking your employees, hey, what can I do for you to help you do your job better? How can I get you to your state of excellence? And you'll be surprised. So and yeah, we can always talk more about this as well.
Well, I think there's a lot of good information in there, particularly that way you're simulating the water cooler conversations, which is something as I work with organizations, I hear that some folks do miss the most, right? It's debatable with a lot of people about whether or not that's worth being back in the office for, but it is something that comes up a lot, are these casual collisions you have in the workplace, right? And in fact, they do lead to something. And it sounds like you've got those two channels you're using to sort of simulate that and sort of hear those things, and also as a replacement for the stand-ups. How is that being received by the team? Are they using it? Are you finding that to be effective?
Yeah, super effective. We used to have them every day say, what are you doing? Like a kind of a typical stand up would be like, what are you working on? What are your blockers? And people would just put these laundry lists of things. I wrote, I answered 15 tickets. I had 5 sales calls, right? It's just contrived and unhelpful. So we moved to a goal-based three times a week, like I said, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, right? And it's really to guide them along their goals and to make sure that they're tying their weekly goals to their monthly goals, their quarterly goals. And if you don't work in like an office environment, let's say a hospitality, you can still have goals around efficiency and customer interactions and things like that. And ask people what they want to have as their goals, and then ask them to follow up with those things each week in that kind of asynchronous stand up.
And then you've got the technology piece that you put in where you're also asking those questions, and that's probably things they can add feedback to the other few days when you're not having those stand-ups or meetings, right? When you mentioned things they were goals they had and things like that, you've got those other ways they can kind of communicate into the system.
Yeah. I mean, and again, you just want to keep just figuring out what's best for you, because when we're doing it every day, I talk to some other managers and it's like, hey, are you reading your team's stand-ups? No, I'm not. You know what I mean? So I'm like, well, let's make it so that you want to read it, right? We're doing this for us, right? And so I think it's okay to just continue to adapt and change.
So I'm gonna put you on the spot with a question I'm hearing a lot in my interactions with leaders and as they're engaging, especially remote teams. Camera on or camera off during meetings. What's your perspective on that? Because I'm hearing, especially from senior leaders, that it really kind of bugs them when some team members won't do camera on for some of their team meetings because they feel like they lose that ability to make quote unquote eye contact, to read facial expressions and things like that. What's your perspective on that as an engagement expert?
Yeah, it can be really interesting. I observe other teams when they're always camera on, and then the CEO goes around and comments on everyone's appearances, right? And it's, in my opinion, inappropriate. It's not the point of work, is how someone appears on the, oh, I see that you're this. That's a leader that doesn't, that small talk for them is talking about the weather, right? It's just not effective. So for me, yeah, I'm kind of ever changing opinion on this, because we have a lot of people on our team that are on camera all the time with customers, right? And so it's fatiguing to be, it creates fatigue to be always having the camera on. So a lot of our meetings we have camera off because it's relaxing. For instance, every Friday we have a book club, where we read a book and we talk about it, or we watch a podcast, and cameras off, and then I'll joke, hey, who completed their laundry during the meeting? Like when I have camera off, like I actually will stand up and I'll lift weights during the meeting. I fidget sometimes, and so I feel more comfortable doing that. If my camera was on and I was lifting weights, it just wouldn't work, right? So certain meetings we have camera on, number of meetings we have camera off. Um, so like, the monthly goals meeting that we have, quarterly goals meeting we have, cameras on. We do a bi-weekly or bi-monthly rather, kind of fun activity, cameras on for that. But a lot of times cameras are off. It's just you can't be camera off and muted. You can't do both of those things. So I'll probably message people and say, hey, time to unmute. Maybe for a moment mute because maybe your spouse comes in or there's a loud noise or what have you. Noise canceling has gotten so good. So, but I understand, but you can't be camera off and muted. Otherwise, just leave the meeting.
Makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. And then can you share some creative low-cost strategies that have worked to keep employees engaged and connected? We're always looking for tips for leaders to keep teams engaged and in the moment, particularly because we know that well-engaged teams provide great customer service and higher productivity, safety, all the things, right? What tips do you have for our audience?
Well, I just love, as I mentioned, this bi-monthly meeting we do, where we come up with some fun activity. This ties back to remote teams. And I use ChatGPT to help me create those. So the last one we did is for your listeners that listen to NPR. There's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. It's a kind of like a game show. Where there's kind of like there's one truth and a number of lies, right? So there's a number of stories, news stories, and then one's real, number aren't. And so I'll do that, and I have to act as the host, and we get to play that game where I'll read some. And ChatGPT finds great news stories that are real, and some of them are just absolutely ridiculous. And it's really fun to see who can guess which ones. Another fun thing that we did was a pitch contest. I asked ChatGPT to come up with a number of topics that are in technology, AI or drones, and then a number of activities that people do, cafe, camping, things like that. And so then I'll match them together. Okay, Brittany, you're going to pitch something that's drones and cafes. Go. You have 2 minutes to come up with it. And then this is a fun activity, right? And so it doesn't have to be just always, hey, everyone, let's all share one thing that nobody knows about you. These kind of silly, team building activities. You can come up with some really fun activities instead using ChatGPT it takes like 5-10 minutes to set some of these things up, and there's no cost to it, and it creates a lot of camaraderie and engagement, and people leave feeling great. So that's one easy thing you can do that basically costs nothing.
Great tip. Thank you for that. So, Alex, this has been amazing so far. I really appreciate it. And folks, I hope you are absolutely enjoying this conversation as well. There are tons of writer downers here. And while you're listening, if you're enjoying this, head on down, leave 5 stars, say something nice, help keep Customer Service Academy one of the top podcasts in the world for customer experience, employee engagement, and consumer guest satisfaction. So thank you very much for FeedSpot to continuing to include us on that list. But Alex, again, great so far, but are you ready for the lightning round?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
5 quick questions, 5 quick thoughts to get to know you just a little bit better. What's your favorite hobby?
My favorite hobby is rock climbing. I've been doing it since I was a kid, and I still
Wow.
love it.
What company do you think really nails employee experience out there in the world?
Airbnb. I have friends that have worked there. I've visited their office in San Francisco. It's an incredible office down to the details and everywhere from the bathroom to the lunchroom. When everyone was doing return to office, because they're, Airbnb, right? No, you can work from anywhere. So they're an incredible company.
Favorite food?
Definitely Mexican, and I've been spending a lot of time in Mexico recently. And it's my favorite dish right now is agua chili. If you've ever had it, it's pretty amazing.
And what is I'm not familiar.
Yeah, it's usually raw shrimp that's been cooked in lime juice. So it's kind of like a ceviche, but it's like a kind of saucy shrimp ceviche with onions and other vegetables.
Nice, sounds delicious. Most interesting job you've ever had?
This is actually how I got my start with gamification. I taught English in Korea after college. So that was a really interesting experience. And a friend of mine gave me a book on holistic education, which was all about gamifying the classroom, which was really cool.
And finally, what are you binge watching right now that you'd recommend to everybody out there?
Well, it's somewhat of an old show, but I love Silicon Valley. I never watched the full series. It really is just a hilarious show and plays a lot into my own life as well because of the technology component, but also just kind of pokes fun at all the things that we hate about Silicon Valley, like excess wealth.
Sounds like a good one. I'll make sure to check it out. So, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show today. How can people get in touch, learn more, find you, know more about your app and what it does in your program around recognition? All the things. Talk to us, Alex.
Yeah, you can just Google Recognize, just as it's normally spelled, or look up Recognize app. It's recognizeapp.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Alex Grande on LinkedIn, or look up Recognize on LinkedIn.
That is great. And we will put links to all of those things in the show notes. You're going to be down there leaving 5 stars anyway. You might as well click on over and take a look. But once again, Alex, thank you for being on and sharing all this amazing information around employee experience, recognition, engagement. Thank you for being on.
Hey, thanks, Tony. It's been a lot of fun.
So, folks, that is our show. This is the year of experiential hospitality. This is where strategy is going to become experience through intentional design, people, and connection. This will be your competitive advantage. If you want to learn more, head on over and check out my book on Amazon, Together We Serve. You can get it on paperback, digital, or audiobook. But until next time, I've been Tony Johnson, your customer experience speaker, consultant, and trainer, reminding you to keep your customers and your employees, as we learned today, at the center of everything you do, because that's where the most amazing things are possible. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will talk to you next week.
This has been Customer Service Academy Radio with Tony Johnson. Tony is available to speak at your event, meeting, or workshop. Have a powerful customer-focused day.